See, that's another thing they didn't teach us in graduate school. Always be sure to turn on your mic. How's that? Am I showing up now? Okay. At any rate, when Constantine legalizes Christianity in 315, the first thing that happens is, as we talked about last week, a theological controversy breaks out regarding the idea of Jesus, of Christ as being human, of being divine, of being some mixture in between. And what is it that Constantine decides, the Roman Emperor Constantine, what is it he decides to do to settle the controversy? To convene a council. And this is one of the key things to know about orthodoxy. Orthodoxy will say that in these councils, which altogether they recognize 7 great ecumenical councils. Ecumenical is the Greek word meaning what? Anybody know? You may remember back in the 60s, everything was about the ecumenical movement, right? Ecumenical is a Greek word meaning worldwide. So the idea here is that these councils give an expression to Christianity worldwide, a universal Christianity. The Greek word for universal means, what's that? Close. I am talking about that, aren't I? Catholic, little c Catholic means universal, ecumenical means worldwide. So the idea is that in these councils, and again, there will be 7 of them, beginning with Nicaea, ending then in the 8th century with the Second Council of Nicaea, the 7th overall, but the Second Council, and we'll talk more in detail about what that council was about next week. But these 7 councils, Orthodox Christians today say, define Christianity. You cannot add anything more. You cannot revise the creed that comes out of Nicaea. Well, as you know, it was revised a few decades later at Constantinople, but now it's set. There can be no more councils, therefore there cannot be any revision of the creed. There cannot be any new ideas, doctrinal ideas added to Christianity, the Orthodox will say. All of these were defined by the councils. And again, who summons the councils? The emperor does, right? So already we're seeing the connection here between religious understanding or religious belief, right? Orthodoxy means what typically for us today? Well, literally in Greek, it means, you remember from last week, so I'm giving you a pop quiz as we go here. Orthodoxy in Greek means literally, you're close, right praise, right? Remember the doxology, a hymn of praise. So orthodox, orthos, doxa, right praise. But the idea comes to be then, if you are praising correctly, then here's what you're praising, here's what you're understanding, here's your thinking, your belief. And so the creed is a statement of that belief. This is what it means to be orthodox. And of course, as we know, this is the identification then, although early on, most Christians would say, you know, we're Orthodox, we're Catholic, we're Apostolic. All would agree on these terms, but, and then they suddenly disappeared. There they come. All of them would agree on this term, but over time, these churches in the East are going to adopt that designation of Big O Orthodox. We are the churches that developed the meaning of Christianity, the belief of Christianity, whereas those churches in the West are going to focus more on the idea that they profess the universal Christian faith, Catholicism, right? You Protestants don't come along till a lot later. I did have a student once when I was at LSU come up to me and say, I'm going to report you to the dean. I said, okay. Would you mind telling me why? She said, you talked about the First Council of Nicaea. I said, yeah. She said, you told us what the Orthodox did. You told us what the Catholics did, but you didn't even mention the Protestants. Oh dear, yes, exactly. So anyway, so again, the First Council of Nicaea, summoned by Constantine, who legalizes Christianity in the Roman Empire, but Constantine himself at the time is not yet baptized. Very interesting. So someone who's really not officially in any way a member of the Christian church is calling this council to settle one of these key theological debates of Christianity. In fact, does anyone know when Constantine was finally baptized?
He rides a bike. He's a biker.
On his deathbed.
He's a biker.
And even though the First Council of Nicaea, as we talked about last week, condemned Arius, this is actually him down here plugging his ears so he doesn't hear the anathemas being issued against him. Even though it condemned Arius and his idea that Christ was less than God, but more than human, when Constantine is baptized, he's baptized by an Arian bishop. So that just goes to indicate how confused and confusing a lot of this still was. But anyway, the Eastern Church is always going to say the only person who can summon a council is an emperor. And even he can't do this anymore, because once there were 7, that's the completeness of Christianity. So these are important things to understand about the Orthodox. The Catholic Church, in the meantime, does the Catholic Church accept these 7 councils? A trick question, isn't it? Yes, they do. They accept the first 7 councils along with the Orthodox. Most Protestants accept a few. Again, Methodist hymnal, I think we have in the back here, didn't at one point, creeds. Of course, this one doesn't have it, my luck. But most Protestants will accept the earlier councils. The Catholic Church accepts the same 7, but they don't stop there. The Catholic Church continues to have councils. They just don't include the Orthodox after the 11th century. And anybody know how many councils overall the Catholic Church accepts as ecumenical binding councils? 21. The last one being in
You're on leash for a little while.
the
You got your freedom gone.
1960s and called Vatican II. Thank you. 1962 to 65. Vatican II was the most recent council recognized by the Roman Catholic Church. Again, the Orthodox say there can be no more councils. At the 7th council, they term the triumph of orthodoxy. That's all that can be said. Okay, so let's get back here to the creed a little bit. Again, oh, yes, sir. Sorry.
No freedom right now. Freedom is a privilege to be earned.
Actually, the split doesn't really occur, although there were growing differences. The split between the two doesn't occur until 1054. I was going to talk about that a little bit next week, but it's actually in the 11th century that the two churches have grown so far apart that there is a division then. And part of that division, part of the justification, at least on the part of the Orthodox churches, is that the Catholics have changed the creed. They have added a word to the creed. When they translated it into Latin, they added the word filioque. And you all know what that means and the implications of that, right? Oh, well, I guess it's a good thing I'm here then, right? Filioque and the Son. The latter part of the creed where it says, we believe in the Holy Spirit who proceeds from the Father. In the Latin translation from the Greek, of course, the creed was originally written in Greek. The Latin translation added and the Son, filioque, a filioque. And one of the things that the Orthodox are going to point to is this was changed without a council. You cannot add anything to the creed. that's the excuse. As we'll see, it's a lot more complicated than just that. But really 1054, although even at that time, again, we'll talk about this a little more next week. See, you're anticipating me. That's what good students do. Even after 1054, the Orthodox churches make an appeal to the Pope to send them an army to push back the advancing forces of Islam. And so this, of course, is what's going to lead to the Crusades. But even then, even though the Patriarch of Constantinople had excommunicated all Catholics, and the Patriarch of Rome, better known as the Pope, has excommunicated all Orthodox, they still have a common enemy in the advance of Islam, which we're also going to talk about a bit next week. So coming attractions. Yes. They would have all considered themselves in communion with one another. Right. They are obviously the Western churches are going to be very Latinized. In fact, as we're going to talk about in just a second, Rome is going to emerge, of course, as the central city in the West. So the Western churches are going to be very Latin. The Eastern churches are still going to be very Greek, but also, as we talked a little bit last week, they're going to recognize that the liturgy can be in different languages. So there's Syriac, there's Greek, whereas the Roman church is, of course, going to focus just on the Latin for a while. All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you. As you all know, if you've been here before, my preference would be that you sit me up a big throne here, and I just come in and sit, and then you ask questions. That's actually the way that it used to be done years ago. Somewhere along the way, they decided students need to sit down and we have to stand. So anyway, the dual nature of Christ then is recognized at Nicaea. The term that's used that we talked about last week is this Greek word homoousios, the same substance. And I know I was trying to explain this right at the end and probably confused you a lot more than necessary. But again, what makes this a chair? Why is this a chair? Why did you walk into the room today and know that you could go over to one of these and sit down? Because of Plato. It participates in ideal chairness. This is Platonic understanding. Plato argued that out there somewhere, there is a world of ideas or ideals. There is the perfect chair. We have a sort of dim understanding of that, so that when we walk into a room and we see something like this, we can recognize it's a chair. What is this one made out of? Metal, fabric, foam, whatever foam is. Could it be made out of something different? Of course. Wood. As I tell my students, back in the 70s, we made them out of beans. They didn't quite look the same, but they performed the same function, right? So the accidents, Plato would say, in other words, the way that we perceive something empirically, the way it looks to us, the way it feels when we touch it, if it makes a noise, these are all accidents in the sense that they are not inherent to chairness. Chairs can be made out of different materials. The substance of the chair, what makes it a chair, is it participates in that substance of ideal chairness. This is the term that the Council Fathers, 318 traditionally, 318 choose to describe their understanding then of the divinity of Christ. The same substance of divinity, whatever the substance of God is, whatever the substance of divinity is, Christ has that same substance, right? This is the key term here. And this is why then Arius is anathematized. because of course he would argue that Christ is less than God. He doesn't participate fully in that divinity in some way. And as we talked about this image last week, notice the chair in the center is empty, although there's an icon on it of the Virgin Mary holding the Christ child. There's an open book of the Gospels. Constantine is the one in red here. But the idea is that when the creed is developed, this is not just the 318 fathers, as they're called, at Nicaea making this decision. They are giving they are stating the beliefs of the apostles. This is apostolic belief, they say. Were the apostles here, this is what they would say. Well, and in a way, the argument was they are here. Because one of the foundations of Christianity, in addition to the apostolic beliefs, is what they called apostolic succession. Jesus chose the apostles. The apostles chose their successors, who become the bishops. The bishops then choose their successors. We're still going to call them bishops after this, and so on down the line. So really, the representatives of the apostles are the ones who give voice to this, right? So you've got apostolic succession, apostolic beliefs. The third part of this sort of apostolic triad is apostolic writings. And of course, that's going to be then the development of the New Testament, which regardless of what you read in Dan Brown, did not take place at the Council of Nicaea. So, but that's a topic for another time here. All right, so anyway, as we talked about last week, and this is my review slide, and see how long it's taken me to talk about professor answers, right? As we talked about last week, it's at a few decades later in the new imperial capital of Constantinople, founded by Constantine. Constantinople means the city of Constantine. Constantine's polis, Constantinople. The New Rome, it's called. The New Rome, the new capital of what the people who live there always considered the Roman Empire. We have other names for it. Some scholars refer to it as the later Roman Empire, once the capital has moved to Constantinople. Eventually, probably the most common term that arises in the West, although the Orthodox still reject it, is to call it the Byzantine Empire, because the city of Constantinople is founded on a little Greek fishing village. In Greek, it's called Bissos. In Latin, it was Byzantium. And so just to kind of separate this Roman Empire, which in 381, when, again, Theodosius comes to the imperial throne, he makes Christianity the only legal religion in the empire. He calls a council in the imperial city. They extend the Nicene Creed, and what we typically call the Nicene Creed today is actually this longer Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed that the Orthodox churches are going to say can never be changed, right? And again, this is one of the divisions between East and West. The West added a word to it. They changed the creed. All right. That's slide one. I've got 46 more, so buckle in. No, I'm going to get you out of here on time today. At any rate, we've seen two things developing here then in terms of authority. Number one, we've seen the way in which the emperor acts in regard to the church, to belief. The Roman emperor traditionally was regarded as the Pontifex Maximus. The Pontifex Maximus. That's a word that literally in Latin means the key bridge builder. Okay, and I heard somebody, okay, well, so he builds bridges, right? No, it's a metaphor. The word religion comes from the Latin word religio, to rejoin what? Human with divine. And so how do you do that? You build a bridge, a metaphorical bridge. So in the Roman Empire, the idea was that the emperor was always the Pontifex Maximus, meaning he was sort of the chief priest of every religion. And so it makes sense that when Constantine legalized Christianity and found that he needed to respond to this issue, he exercises his authority as Pontifex Maximus, right? There's still a religious leader in the world today who's part of whose official title is Pontifex Maximus. The Pope. The Pope. That's why we refer to papal rule as the pontificate, right? It actually comes from the Latin word for bridge, but it's this idea of sort of being the chief priest. So again, we've seen Constantine involve himself in these matters, even though he's not a baptized Christian. The East is going to embrace this. Councils should be called by emperors. The second part is, well, Constantine, again, wasn't baptized. He hasn't studied theology. So we can't depend on the emperor to make the decisions, but he's given us a way that we can make these decisions. He set the bar here by having a council in which the bishops come together, the successors of the apostles come together and make a decision. So every time there's a decision to be made, at least up until the 8th century, every time there's a decision to be made, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get together, all the bishops, and we're going to make the decision. Once that decision is made, then, with this later Roman Empire, or again, what's going to become the Byzantine Empire, once the decision is made at a council, it becomes the responsibility then of the political arm, the emperor, to enforce that orthodoxy. He doesn't make the decisions, but he enforces them. This is what the Byzantines, the later Romans, understood to be the purpose of a Christian empire, right? So you've got the councils, you've got the bishops, you've got the emperor, all working together here in some way. Well, are all bishops equal? Yes, and some are more equal than others. Over time, 3 cities, the bishops in 3 cities, come to be called patriarchs, fathers, because